So, so that's the fear factor, the blackmail factor, the sheer intimidation factor. But I think there's a much worse and more insidious one. There are many people who say, well, it's not that we're afraid, though they are. It's that we mustn't be mean. We've got to respect. We must defer to religious sensibilities. This is far, far more dangerous, because eventually it's going to mean, it already does mean, has meant recently at the Washington Post, to take another cartoon example, that boring cartoonist you probably don't bother with on the funny pages called Burke Breathed. He did some Ramadan cartoon or another. I don't know what it, I did look at it. It wasn't terrifically funny, nor was it really very offensive, but it was shown by the editors of the Washington Post to the Muslim staffers, say, if we ran this, would your feelings be hurt? They said, well, if you're going to ask them and give them the chance to have an emotional veto, who would miss such a chance if they belonged to some cult? They said, yes, it would offend us. Didn't run. Again, crying before they hurt. Let's look for ways to surrender. Let's find a way to run up the white flag. This has got to stop. It has to stop right now, before it becomes impossible to oppose, before it's established itself as a principle within our culture. And I'm not sure we have very much more time before that's where we'll be.
Christopher, we did our part. If you saw the cartoon that was created that included all of our speakers, you'll notice on one part of the scale there is someone that looks like Osama bin Laden. No, that's really the prophet. We're not scared. Next question.
Hi, I'm currently a resident of East Harlem, and every Sunday go out and I see the people in their dress. And I also saw recently your debate with the Reverend Al Sharpton about God, and I notice very anecdotally in the community that I'm living in now that there's a strong correlation between people of faith and people who are able to sort of rise above the fray in terms of the general prostitution, drug addiction that I see so frequently. I'm wondering if you think that the discourse, the public discourse, I mean, looking at the crowd, we're obviously very solidly middle class, your readers are mostly middle class, I assume. If the discourse should be different, or if you could choose a different discourse to talking about people, even globally, who are typically very poor, I feel like our discourse is very middle class centric.
Look, I've had this before, and now I'm having it again, and so thank you for giving me the opportunity. When I first unmasked my batteries against the ghastly Mother Teresa, or what's motherly about her? Hideous virgin and fraud and fanatic and fundamentalist, shriveled old bat. As far from the nurture of motherhood as a woman could decently get. Anyway, when I first said what I thought about her, people said, it would have been 20 years ago that Bishop Fulton Sheen or someone like that would have said, you have offended, you've blasphemed, you've profaned the sacraments of Holy Mother Church. Something like that would have used to be said. You don't get that anymore. You're told, no, you've upset the Catholic community. And bear in mind, many poor Guatemalan immigrants and others go to these churches, and you're upsetting them and just depriving them of comfort, and that's what's supposed to be the moral blackmail involved. Very much the same as involved in the kowtowing to Islam, by the way, and the case you mentioned, which is why in my book I go so far out of my way to denounce the cult of Dr. Martin Luther King, who, though a very admirable person, only felt able to express a perfectly decent and rational demand for fair and equal treatment for black Americans in Baptist terms. Very clever strategically, but because of the feeling that now is very wide, you say middle class, to me, and I had a feeling you weren't saying it in a flattering tone, but never mind, I have a thick skin, I have a broad back. The entire white middle class has the absolute condescending view of black Americans that they like preachers. They like preacher men. It's almost like their sense of rhythm. They go for the pulpit, as a result of which frauds of Chaucerian proportions, like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, automatically get the media baptism. They must be the spokesman for black America in some way. This is a qualitative degeneration of a terrific order. I've met Sharpton a lot. I've debated with him frequently. I mean, he's a religious businessman of the most obvious kind. He just proves what is proved often in this country, that you can get away with anything if you put Reverend in front of your name, or if you can get people to call you Reverend. So that's what has to be opposed. We have to have the fortitude to say no. To those who are afflicted, to those who really are poor, to those who really are suffering, we will say, honestly, that those who offer them false consolation are not their friends. Who doesn't know by now that the cure for poverty is not charity in Calcutta? Who doesn't know that? Why did we suddenly decide to forget what we'd learned over the generations, that charity is an insult to the poor and a way of prolonging poverty? That Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor, she was a friend of poverty. That there is only one cure for poverty, and that is, by the way, the liberation of women. And which works every time, against which all religion has always set its face, and against which Mother Teresa spent a lifetime campaigning to ensure that misery and poverty and dirt and disease and ignorance would continue, so that there would be ever more people to testify to the Catholic faith. That's the way to face it.
I want to address a couple of things that you said about human evolution, because I'd like to take issue with them. I think, in general, what you've been saying is wonderful, but I would not like you to talk about this general malaise of the human species. And this is what I would like to direct my observations about. First of all, you talk about this 100,000, 200,000, 50,000 year evolutionary scheme of humans being horrible and out of control. But it seems to me, I'm an anthropologist.
Not really, no.
Well, but I've studied human evolution for a long time. And it seems to me that there are really serious questions to ask about how human evolution evolved. And that has to do with the way religious people see us as a creature with some sort of supernatural or spiritual quality that had to appear someplace along our evolutionary line. Chimpanzees don't have it, and we do. When did that appear, and in what context? In an evolutionary context, it could occur only in a couple of ways. Number one, it could appear just like that, and you have it, and your folks don't. In which case, we're dealing with a very serious problem in how you deal with your folks who aren't human. On the other hand, it could appear gradually in a Darwinian gradualist way, and in which case, you're only half human, and you have only partially spiritual qualities. It seems to me that when we talk about human evolution, and we want to use the quality of our evolved selves in dealing with religious people, what we ought to be doing is dealing with the impossibility of seeing this spiritual development in our own line.
Well, I'm quite happy to take that as a comment. And it's been called to my attention that I committed an injustice a moment ago. I ought to have said it was Borders bookstore. So would you mind switching your boycott? Thank you. I can't tell them apart, to be absolutely honest with you, but I do remember saying, whichever one it was, I wasn't going there ever again.
Hi, Eddie Tabash here. Though I'm a constitutional lawyer, I moonlight as an atheist philosopher, and I've engaged some of the world's foremost Christian philosophers on college campus debates on God's existence. And I noticed, particularly in Missoula, Montana, 4 years ago when I debated Richard Swinburne in a formal debate on God's existence, that there is a hunger among college students for the specific technical atheist arguments against the existence of God. And I'm more than willing to interlope in the world of philosophy and study that as much as possible to do these debates. But I'm wondering, in your campaign for your book to the general public, have you found a similar kind of interest where there's a general receptivity on the part of